All right, thank you guys. Just if you're just joining us, if you look in the chat, please share your name, your organization, your position, and one thing you'd like to learn more about today. All right, I'm going to get started while people are putting stuff in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to spend some time talking about my favorite topic ever, which is sector mobilization and the career-wise blueprint. This is going to be a prerequisite to our time together in December. We're really excited to see everyone in person, and we really want to spend the most of our time in person, kind of working and workshopping together. And so we wanted to get all of the talking out of the way ahead of time and really get some time between now and when we meet in December to kind of think about this and kind of bring things forward when we get together in December. So really what we're going to talk about today is our sector mobilization work, the career-wise blueprint, and then have some time at the end for some questions and feedback. Our main objectives is we really want to understand what sector mobilization is and the core principles. Many of you have heard this before. It might be a refresher, so I'm going to kind of scoot through that for folks that have seen that before. We will talk about and examine the purpose and value of sector mobilization, why we are doing this, and then we're really going to spend the bulk of our time together talking about the how. And the how is this blueprint that we've been talking about and kind of the like framework for how we are going through this process. And then, as I mentioned, we really want to make sure that you guys feel really prepared to come to the network retreat. We will have some homework coming out of this just to get people thinking about the work we want to do together when we're in person. And so we want to make sure you're thinking that throughout. So really throughout this presentation, just be thinking about kind of what work is already in flight in my organization and locally that I want to bring together to this great community of folks that are engaging in similar type efforts that I can workshop with them. That's really the core theme of what we're trying to get to together. And so be thinking about that as we go through this presentation today. All right. So up front, we want to just get some definitions and common understanding of what we're talking about up front. We have a lot of terms that we fly around and they can be used interchangeably in a lot of ways. But what we really want to be clear on is for the purposes of this presentation today and kind of the through line of this continuum is understanding the different definitions we're using here. So most commonly, when we talk about a sector, we mean a part of our economy made up of companies that have similar kind of goods, services, products, and they're grouped together. So we think about the business sector, the tech sector, healthcare, construction. So that's typically what comes to mind when people think of a sector. And therefore, we always kind of frame this conversation around employers and businesses, which is really important, but we're actually going to expand what we mean by a sector because it's not fully going to encompass everything that we need in order to do the objective that we're trying to get to. So we're going to take it a step further and we're going to talk about, well, what is the workforce sector, right? For us as intermediaries, right? We are we are part of the workforce sector, and this piece kind of includes common training standards, right? What does it mean to get someone ready for the workplace? What are the licensure requirements? What are the training programs that might be required? So, for example, apprenticeship programs, as we all know, are part of the workforce sector. CTE, labor unions, etc. So that's kind of the next step of this. Then we talk about kind of what does it mean for sector-based organizing, right? It's not just exclusive to workforce development, so it could be collaborative efforts. What are the common standards? What are industry practices, right? A sector cannot exist without training, without the workforce sector, right? Because they need inputs of people and labor to kind of go into that. And so there is some collective organizing that needs to happen, which we are terming sector-based organizing. And that is kind of the 1.0 version of sector mobilization. So sector mobilization is kind of our shining star, which is to leverage existing forums, right? Leverage existing forums that already exist, economic development organizations, workforce boards, and intermediaries that can kind of come together to work towards a common goal. In career-wise, our common goal is often apprenticeship, right? We talk about youth apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, post-secondary, and degree-aligned apprenticeship. There's a whole continuum of that. But really, we're trying to get the sector to come together to be able to solve a problem. And we'll talk a little bit more about the how in just a few minutes. And I keep likening this to the scientific method. And so, really, this sector mobilization is a way to solve a common problem within a sector by including everyone in that ecosystem. So, really, what sector mobilization intends to do is currently a lot of us are working in a very intermediary driven space. So, our programs are kind of driven one to one with all of these relationships to be able to get K-12 to do what we need them to get employers to do what they need to get higher ed, et cetera. There's probably a lot more people that we work with one to one to kind of compel them to do what we need them to do. And what sector mobilization does is it connects all of these pieces so that the intermediary is not the one holding the bag to get it all to work, that there's interconnected and codependent systems that are put in place that strengthen the ecosystem, that strengthen the sector to enable the outcome or the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And so, one of the things that we find particularly compelling about all of this is that when we had the intermediary driven, if one arm of this relationship gets something happens to it, right? If K-12 is not doing their part, the only person or only entity that is there to compel K-12 to do what is needed is the intermediary, right? We're missing kind of the interconnectivity of, well, if K-12 is not doing what they need to, we have both the employer and higher education and an intermediary putting pressure on K-12 to kind of meet the needs of the other pieces of that ecosystem and so on and so forth, right? It's all interconnected. And so not one piece of the puzzle can't fall out without other pieces being affected, and therefore kind of like this is like a rising tide lifts all boats, and that interconnectedness is the thing that will really enable the conditions by which things like apprenticeships can grow and thrive. So before I move on to the next piece, this is kind of our what is sector mobilization and kind of what is the goal of all of this. I want to get a little gut check here. Is this in line with the way that you're already thinking about how you are coordinating ecosystems and getting folks to work more interconnectedly in order to solve some of the problems that you're working on? Does this bring up any questions or any thoughts about what a sector means, how you've been engaging in this type of work? Would love people to drop in the chat any thoughts or things that have come up about how you're thinking about this already in your current the places that you're currently working. And again, you can put things in the chat as we go, but feel free to drop in the chat any thoughts or questions about kind of the language we're using here too. I'll give it my good old-fashioned teacher pause before moving on. I feel disoriented by not having people on the screen, so. Okay. So next, after we talked about the what, we really want to talk about the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this so important? And why is this a big bet that we at CareerWise are making as to the way that we are going to kind of put forward this initiative? So for us, the way we've been thinking about this is, it's very difficult for us to enable scale when we are relying on these one-to-one relationships that are often kind of person specific or there's a lot of times like if philanthropy is involved, like if the money goes away, kind of it won't survive. Or if the training provider is weak in the ecosystem, then it's not getting enough value, right? We talk a lot about ROI, and so when that's not coming through, the cost up front is far too great for people to continue. So really, the way we think about this is that once you get kind of the ecosystem built, you have an opportunity to really think about what are the common talent needs, right? What is the common problem you're trying to solve by bringing this ecosystem together? And then that ecosystem can inform more standardized pathways. We're not then creating, oh, this company needs the pathway to be like this, and this company needs to be a pathway like that. we're getting the voices of the people in the system to come together to really talk about what is that standardized pathway going to look like. Now, that doesn't mean that there can't be customization at certain points in the process. It just means that we are not trying to create those pathways on a one-to-one basis. We're trying to get them to talk to each other and really think like, if you guys have this common need, shouldn't we be solving it in some sort of common standardized way that then we can adjust kind of later down the line, as opposed to just trying to build one thing and then we build the next thing and so on. And so by doing this and making this coordination, it really will enable that scale that we're looking for. And also, this also is a good way for people to compel each other to do it. And it's not just us driving the ask, other people are asking of each other. It really does also reduce risk. So you're not just putting your neck out there and saying, like, yes, I'm going to be the one that does this and champion this. There's enough mass that is able to kind of test and put lower risk into the system to make this something that can be tested and then move on from there. So, one of the things that's really important to look at when we're talking about this sector is who is involved in the sector. So, what are the folks that are kind of coming to the table to kind of solve this problem and be part of this ecosystem? So, when we talk about the homework and when we get together, we're going to ask you guys to be thinking about kind of, yes, we have employers at the table, but who else is in this ecosystem that we need to bring together to help solve the problem that we're trying to solve? So, from our perspective, there's a handful of people that we've really been focusing on. So, obviously, young people, that's our common audience here, right? They're the ones that are participating in that classroom learning and the work based training programs. They're like kind of our end user of what we're trying to build. Our employers are the key kind of stakeholders here to be able to provide that on the job training, right? They're the ones that are really driving the conversation around what the needs are in the workforce sector. They're the ones that are providing that really direct feedback about what they need, right? That's what's going to influence what happens in K-12 or in higher ed or in any other training provider. We hear a lot and we work a lot with industry associations. They are really vital to making this work be activated and coordinated, right? We see that industry associations have been really powerful in being able to make the work come to fruition and hold folks accountable to the problem solving that they want to kind of engage in. When we've talked to other people about this and we've kind of shopped this around, a lot of times sector mobilization is the mechanism by which industry associations can be created. So sometimes people use sector mobilization. The problem they're trying to solve is building an industry association. That's really, really helpful. And we see a lot of success when people are able to kind of get those put together. Um, Obviously, the education system is really vital to this as well. So again, K-12, higher education, what does that kind of through line look like? What is the curriculum and the programs that are preparing young people and people later in life for the employer needs, right? To meet the needs of employers and preparing people for both those durable and technical skills that kind of make them a well-rounded employee. Labor unions are another one. They can either really be helpful or hurtful to your initiatives because if you don't have them on board, there's obviously a lot of high regulation and kind of workplace safety requirements that need to be considered. And so if you don't have them at the table, you run the risk of getting something really beautiful put together that's not actually going to work when you have a labor influencing what happens at the industry. And then, of course, us as program builders, intermediaries, really bridging these connections, being those ecosystem enablers that can kind of push the scale and pathway and really coordinate all of this. And you'll hear me use the word coordinate 10 million times throughout this presentation, but that's really our role here. In the chat, if there are other folks or other kind of sector partners that you think of that come to mind in this kind of framework, I would love to hear them because these are ones that we want to make sure we're talking about when we get together in December and kind of surfacing any other big players that would be in this ecosystem. And Jocelyn, please let me know. It's hard to follow the chat as I'm going. So please let me know if there's anything that's coming up as I'm talking through this.
Yes, I'll do that. None that I see so far.
Great. Government, great question. Yeah, so government, I think, can kind of be in any of these if you think about it, right? So it depends on what you mean by like what government role you're playing. So if you need the government to help with legislation, right? That could be the work of program builders. Um, if they're part of an industry association, that could be really influential. So I think that's a great call out, Whitney, to kind of figure out if it's separate or something that's kind of intertwined. Chambers, yeah, chambers is a really good one. Thank you, Sarah. That's a really great one to pick out as well. I know a lot of folks are using like working through their chambers to do sector mobilization. So those are great call outs. I'm going to jot those down too so we can incorporate them more explicitly when we're together.
Yeah, and government might be something that you think about, especially if you're registering, right? Because you might be registering your like a youth apprenticeship with your state agency or with USDOL as well. And so certainly they can come in terms of the requirements, kind of on what is a part of a registered apprenticeship. And so we appreciate you thinking about that as well.
Right, and government can be employers too. Thanks, Wendy. I know, and that's kind of true about all of these entities. Like a lot of these are also cross-functional, which is really great because they can kind of like when you have different players in the room and you're kind of really building this ecosystem, you can kind of have people see things from both sides, which is really powerful. So that's really helpful. Thank you guys. Keep thinking about those because these are really helpful to hear kind of what who you're engaging with and how your efforts have kind of shaped and the people that have really championed these efforts. Okay, we're doing okay on time, but now we're getting into the big stuff. So that was our why. Why are we doing sector mobilization? And here is the big reveal and the how. So, about almost a year ago now, we started this effort in New York to really bring together the healthcare sector and use that as our template for how we would craft a methodology and kind of a um, uh, framework for how we would do this. And so we were simultaneously engaging in sector mobilization in the healthcare sector as we were making this blueprint. We've gotten a lot of input along the way. And so what we set out to do is really create a unique approach to sector based mobilizing for youth apprenticeship. So again, our end goal really is youth apprenticeship, but there's a lot of stops along the way to youth apprenticeship that sector mobilization can enable. And we've seen a lot of really cool things come out of this. Um, so while we do have a perspective at CareerWise that youth apprenticeship is the goal, that's not necessarily always the only outcome. And it's really nice that we have these little happy accidents along the way of sector mobilization that are enabling really wonderful and robust work-based learning opportunities for young people. And again, this coordinated ecosystem is the thing that really is getting people engaged in the work and advocacy that we're doing. Within the blueprint, we really are thinking of it as this framework for how to mobilize a sector. There are tools and templates, and there's a lot of detail and depth. And I've gotten a lot of feedback that it's really, really dense and really, really difficult to consume. So if you're not actively working on it, it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around. And so my goal today is to really break it down into a kind of give you the 10,000 feet, but then drop it down to like 5,000 feet so you can really kind of get an idea of what each section of the blueprint is aims to do. And as I said, the blueprint was created kind of as we were going through this and developed organically with New York as leading in healthcare, Colorado in advanced manufacturing. We've had some really great successes and inputs from the work that we've done with our teaching apprenticeships in Colorado. So we've tried to really make sure that we are getting some good inputs and feedback along the way. We also have what we call a BAM, which is our blueprint activation, advancement and activation meetings. So that is core folks across the organization who are engaging in this work in different ways that have been advising on the blueprint and really getting the inputs from all different facets of our work. So that the blueprint is representational of the work that we're doing and the kind of feedback that's happening in real time. And this again is most meant to be a living and breathing document that we are kind of refining and learning and growing over time. And so we really want to use this as both organizational change management, and continual learning as we continue to develop. So when we say our blueprint, we're really thinking like the career-wise way to sector mobilization. We'll apply for like a patent or a trademark at some point, I'm sure. No, I'm kidding. Okay. So I know many of you have seen this before. So this is the framework. So this is kind of again the 10,000 foot view on the what the blueprint is. So the main section of the blueprint is this blue wheel that we call sector mobilization, and this is kind of the biggest scope of work that, or like the engine of the work that drives the other two wheels, right? So as this wheel is turning, the program and pathways and sales wheels are kind of feeding into the sector mobilization wheel, and I'll explain kind of what that means in just a minute. But really, what I want to try to do today is break this down into four main sections so you can kind of get the purpose of each piece, of each component of the blueprint without having to get into the really scary document that everyone says to me is really difficult to consume, which it is. You're not wrong. So we're going to try to just break this down in a way that we can really understand why each of these pieces are really imperative to the success of mobilizing a sector. Okay, so really the methodology here, as I said in the beginning, I've kind of been thinking about it a little bit like the scientific method. And so the first piece and like the tip of the spear here, so when we talk about kind of this section here, these two steps, we want to really understand what we're trying to solve, or like what, get really good information. So understanding labor trends, training pipelines, ecosystem capacity, really rooted in data and evidence that we can say, okay, this is the reason why we should go after this sector, right? We live right where I'm in New York City, and if someone came and said we want to start doing farming and agriculture, I would be surprised. But this piece here is really saying, like, okay, if you're saying you want to do like an agriculture and farming apprenticeship, let's find some data to back this up that this is something that we should be doing in New York City, right? Obviously, that's an extreme example, but it's difficult sometimes for us when we have people coming to our doors, or when we're looking for kind of opportunities for young people to have a clear idea about if a sector is actually ripe for supporting these types of programs. And to be able to get our arms around that on the front end and not kind of halfway down the road is always better, because then you can really understand, okay, if we have a good case for why we should do this sector, then we can start to uncover who might be able to be involved in that. And then step to this hypothesize section where we can say, okay, if this sector is something that can benefit from apprenticeship or these work-based learning opportunities, or some sort of like coordinated ecosystem. What is a potential hypothesis that we can kind of draw upon to solve a problem that we're identifying? So, an example in New York City for healthcare is that we know there's a nursing shortage. And we looked into a lot of data and information about kind of, is this a nursing shortage like just in certain parts of New York City, just within certain hospital systems? Is this more widespread? What is the depth of this, and like what is the appetite for people to actually want to solve this problem? How are they already trying to solve this problem? We're really trying to do a lot of that legwork up front, and then also think like, yeah, but even if there is a nursing shortage, could our solution, like this youth pathway piece, really be something that can solve this problem? And so by doing that deep look on the front end with really evidence to support it, we were able to come up with a hypothesis, a vision for what it could potentially look like. Once we did that, we really had to make sure that our hypothesis was tested, again, just in hypothesis phase, with all of those stakeholders. If we're going to do this pathway, do employers think that that's right? Like, do they think that this is the right hypothesis to be solving this problem? Do they actually think this is a problem that should be solved? Education, community partners, funders, government, unions, right? All of those people have to kind of understand what that analysis and hypothesis are before we can kind of move on. The next piece here is really designing, right? This is where we get into the depth. Everyone's kind of like, all right, great. That sounds like a good problem to solve. We think this like way to solve it would be the right thing. Let's pull up our sleeves and start trying to solve this problem. Really getting people to buy in to help solve the problem together. And it's not, again, not just the intermediary trying to solve the problem. We all have to come together to solve this problem together. Again, I have my like seventh grade science class in my head. Group projects, we all couldn't just do our own project. We had to really work with our team to get the project done. Then you move on to testing, right? We built this beautiful thing. We have this great data to back it up. We have all the right players in place. How can we release it into the world and really get it tested, right? Pilot that initiative, get our early adopters in at the ground floor. And then again, the wheel kind of turns back around because you want to refine, you want to grow. If it's working and it's working really well, how do we get towards scale? If there's things that need to be tweaked in order to enable that scale, how can we be editing those things, right? And the cool thing about this is that there's a lot of sectors that we're working with here in New York that have been in flight for a long time. And so we can drop back into this system. Like we have good data as to why we're in a certain sector and kind of how to solve problems, but we might need to go back to the design phase and get people to come together here because we hadn't done that before and then kind of move on from there. So that's kind of what's cool about this is that yes, it's a little bit linear as it stands here, but it's actually more cyclical and kind of omnipresent and happening all the time that make this kind of something that we think can be useful kind of at all times and not just on a linear timeline. Any questions again here on the big picture methodology before I move on? Or anything else coming up in the chat, Jocelyn?
Not that I can see. Um,
TPM. So glad you're bringing it up, Whitney. Yes, it's very similar to that. I don't know it super well. I just heard it as I've shopped this around because people have kept saying to me, like, this sounds a lot like TPM. Um, I because this has come up a few times, I'm going to talk to the folks that we've been working with to get some like top level summaries of that because I do think it would be helpful for folks who are already engaging in something like TPM of seeing like the similarities and differences and where it kind of like converges and diverges, just so that we can kind of like crosswalk for folks. So yeah, just that's a great call out, Whitney. Appreciate you saying that. Okay, now we're going to get into the fun stuff. So as I said, I'm going to go through the four main buckets I broke this up into is steps 1 and 2 here, kind of what is the purpose, outcomes that we're looking for in this section, this like tip of the spear, kind of this big blue wheel, the pathways and program wheel, and the sales wheel. And those four big buckets are kind of what makes up the entire blueprint. And again, there's like tools and resources and steps and guidance that flow from all of those pieces. Okay, so the first piece here, these little like handle of the hair dryer, we like to call it sometimes. It's the sector prioritization. This is what I was talking about our analysis phase, right? We analyze. Right here, this step of the process is where we really want to identify and prioritize this sector and what has the greatest impact for biggest impact for the programs that we're trying to run, analyzing labor markets, what's the employer demand, where are the student needs, what's the training capacity, what is the ecosystem's readiness to be able to come together to figure out kind of the problem that you want to solve, right? So this is really where we want to do our due diligence. Our consulting team has been working on what we call like a green lighting process. And again, we don't want this to be the only time. Like, there's a lot of kind of stage gates throughout this process that we want to continually gut check. Like, we'll do a lot of the work up front, but throughout the sector mobilization process, we really want to make sure we're constantly checking in and saying, like, all right, are we still sure that this is going to yield the greatest impact, that there's still an employer demand? We had a meeting this morning where we're talking about kind of how the landscape of New York City is shifting away from business and finance, right? So just kind of continually checking in on that. Within this process, within these two steps, there's key kind of things that you want to make sure you're doing, that we want to make sure we're doing. Making sure we're analyzing that market trend, right? What is the entry level talent demand? Because sometimes, like, especially in healthcare, we see that there's a high demand for nursing, but typically it's like BSNs, bachelor degree nursing, right? That's not great for young people. So, are there actually entry level demands that are in entry level roles that are in demand, like an MA or an LPN, right? So, there's a difference there that we really want to really like tease out. And then will it actually culminate in a living wage? One of the things we keep hearing about is like behavioral health. And one of the endpoints for behavioral health is like kind of a minimum wage job, right? Is that going to be something that we want to put our time and effort into that would be good for young people and that there's a demand for? At this point is when we want to also kind of get an employer and education champions, right? Like, who are the people that are going to be willing to put their foot out first or be the ones to advocate for this work, and be able to kind of be that tip of the spear, because we do need people that are going to be willing to kind of be the louder voice when things get a little rocky. And then again, like, assess that ecosystem and internal team capacity, right? This is a big, like, we might say, like, this is a big sector. Like, do we have the actual capacity to support what is needed and to drive the work that will enable these conditions? Within this stage two, we really want to make sure that there are things that we are absolutely checking before we move on, right? We don't want to move on to different places until we guarantee that we have selected the sector and the reasons for that. That we have employer and education partners identified, right? You don't want to go into this without even knowing kind of who you're going to do. So you're really turning over all those stones about who in the ecosystem can be there. And again, making sure that ecosystem and team readiness is confirmed. And the intended outcome here is really making sure that we have the prioritized sector, the employer champions kind of identified, and really good actionable insights and to guide that next step, right? So this is where we kind of shift from the analyze to hypothesize stage. This is when we really start to shape that hypothesis as we move into the full wheel of sector mobilization. Jenny, thank you so much for calling that out. I will connect with you too. I know Whitney will as well, but I definitely want to chat with you about TPM, because I think that's a really helpful framework to think about as in this conversation. Okay, as we move on from sector prioritization, the next piece is the sector mobilization. So again, we're going to kind of suspend reality for a second. I'm making it seem like this whole wheel can be accomplished all together. You can't really get through this whole wheel without also going through the sales and pathway and program cycle. But I just want to kind of again give the theory and methodology behind what's happening in this wheel before I get into the details of the pathways and program and sales. So I had some feedback that actually we should change the colors, but I didn't want to mess with our branding. It really should be that the sales and pathway and programs, that should be yellow and blue, and then this one should really be green because yellow and blue make green, right? So think about it that way. So this is what is happens as a result of both the pathways and programs and sales. So really the purpose of this sector mobilization wheel is to engage the employers and stakeholders to build alignment, surface shared challenges and opportunities, and engage the sector in collaborative program development. So this is like our problem solving wheel. And really this wheel is what enables our ecosystem to work together. This is like the image I have in my head is like people sitting around the table, putting their arms to linking their arms together and saying, we're going to work together and we are going to solve this problem together. That's really what this wheel is doing. So here is when you're kind of just conducting discovery meetings, right? You're talking to all of these players in the ecosystem and saying kind of, what are the problems you see? What is your highest need? What are some things you're already trying to do? Where do you see gaps in the way that you're already trying to solve for this problem? What is your appetite and aptitude to be able to come to this table and solve this problem? And again, like, who are the people who are already out on front of this? Who are the ones that are already kind of prioritizing solving this problem and are surfacing those key challenges? And then really synthesizing what are those challenges and opportunities through this process. Some of the key kind of things that you want to do before you move through this whole piece here is you really want to have these like initial conversations with the folks in the ecosystem to get those insights, right? once you get those insights, you kind of aggregate them all together and bring everyone to the same table, right? You're going to have kind of this convening that brings everyone together so that everyone can hear from each other. And it's not just us saying it one to one. I need the employer to directly tell K-12 that their training program does not meet their needs, as opposed to me saying, like, hey, I heard from the employer your training program is bad. I need the employer to say that directly to the education system and vice versa. And then really, this is also the point at which the planning priorities are surfaced. So this is really where we nail down people affirming that our hypothesis is the right way to go about solving this problem and the priorities by which we are going to address them in our pathways and programs section is going to be surfaced. So really the outcome of this wheel here is that you have a coordinated employer and stakeholder network with aligned priorities, with identified champions, and actionable insights to inform solution and co creation. So by the end of this wheel, when you actually get people mobilized, you now have this really nice engine that you're able to use in perpetuity to be able to continue to solve problems for the ecosystem. Any questions or thoughts on this section and kind of like what this does? So the sector mobilization piece is really kind of like how do we build this ecosystem? How do we get people to work together to solve the problem and to kind of like, get into that get to the testing phase of our scientific method, for lack of a better term. I'll leave it here for a minute. Okay. Now, we cannot bring people to the table. How much of this, oh, do we make visible to the participating partners? Great question. Thank you, Joe. Very, very visible. The idea here is really to make sure everyone kind of begins with the end in mind and is constantly participating in the building, right? So we're not trying to be kind of the puppeteers behind the scene. We really want them to be equal participants in this entire process, right? And so what was really nice about the way we've done this with our pilot in New York in healthcare is that career-wise got to be an equal player and participant within this sector mobilization process. And yes, we are doing a lot of like the driving of the work. Another analogy I like to use, it's like a car. So the employer is like the steering wheel or the person driving the car, but you can't just have a car with a driver. The engine is kind of like career wise, we are the ones that kind of are making this all go, but there's a lot of other components to the car that we need so that we can really make sure that the whole car is working. And so we got to be, right, an equally valuable piece of the puzzle and not just the ones that were doing everything. We weren't the whole car, right? So we really want to make sure kind of our participating partners kind of see behind the curtain of what this ecosystem takes. Megan, also great question. Common tools and way to gather the data and information during analysis. Yes. And I don't know, I see Noelle on the call, but I don't know if like you want to come off mute, Noelle, and kind of talk a little bit about what that green lighting process has looked like and how you guys think about what that common tool and way to gather data. If you are unable to come off mute, I don't want to put you on the spot. We can certainly send out information on the back end, but it is a good theory that Noelle and the team have kind of thought about for how to make that a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah, I'll say too, like we are also provided a lot of tools, from you, Anne, that we put into place around this. But we did a macroeconomic analysis of some of the most common sector needs across the country. And so we've sort of prioritized those sectors to start with. Then from there, there's a sector prioritization sort of stage gate already laid out. It's a checklist of different research that we can do on behalf of you all to provide you with some information about where there might be gaps or places to look at. And then from there, we also have our occupational green lighting process that helps us make sure that the pathway that we're honing in on is a good one and is viable and high quality. So those are sort of the three ways that we can help.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Okay, so Now switching to sales, right? If we really want to get people to come to a table, right, we have to like get them to come to the table. How do we do that? When we typically used to think about sales, we used to think like we're selling our program. We want someone to buy our program, like take it on. But instead, what sector mobilization does is it shifts how we think about sales. And instead, we are using this to get ecosystem players to the table to solve the problem. So instead of us trying to sell a program to people, we are now trying to help have like sell them um, an engagement opportunity that will help solve a problem. So we're kind of getting them into a like solutions machine. We're selling them like a solutions machine. You have this problem. We think you could be someone really influential in helping solve that problem. Are you willing to come to the table to solve that problem together? And oh, by the way, an end result of this could be something like you now have a talent pipeline if you're an employer, or you might have really good insights if you're an education training provider, on how to better refine your practices so you have better outcomes for young people. If you're a funder, or you're a labor union, right? Now you have kind of like a talent pipeline for your union, right? So instead of just trying to get people to buy a product that we're selling, we're really asking them to come and be part of our ecosystem that they have influence over. And so, really, the purpose of this whole wheel here is to drive that engagement, get their interest, and prepare kind of them to get handed off to this to be mobilized. So within these steps, we're really looking to identify and prioritize those leads, the employer leads, and support from champions. So who are the people that are going to be kind of have their foot out first? Really make sure we're assessing their interest and understanding what those specific occupations are here. Again, this kind of like intersects with our greenlighting process. So again, we'll do some analysis and say, within healthcare, we think that there's nursing and surge tech and rad tech maybe, but we really need to hear from the industry about what that looks like. And in healthcare, we both talked to employers and the labor unions, and made sure we were clear on both of those. And our sales cycle kind of is the thing that enabled that. And then that is also the way that we synthesize the hand off to the employers, right? And make sure that we have that data collected, because the other thing that happens during the sales cycle is that not everyone is ready to come to the table and be part of this process. Sometimes they're just not there yet. That's okay. We want to make sure we're collecting all of that information, because these wheels are going to keep turning. You might not be right now, but it would be still great to have you at the table. Oh, you still don't want to be at the table? That's fine. We're going to come back to you, and we're going to know that you guys are working on this thing in a different way. And so we constantly have this pipeline and this cycle that's spinning as things are moving along through the problem solving that we're engaging in at that one time. The idea here is that there's at least 3 to 5 employers that commit to help join the convening and join this effort. It's really difficult to have kind of the right um, amount of voice if you only have one employer, right? If one employer is the only one at the table, even 2 employers, it's not really representative of the entire sector. You need at least 3 to kind of balance those voices. So that's kind of why we say 3 to 5. Again, not a hard and fast rule. It just is very helpful to have a more critical mass of industry employers coming together, because it really kind of shows that collective voice in a more well-rounded way. And again, the intended outcome here is that you have this pipeline, right? Again, they may not all be at the table this time, but you do have this bench. And again, who else in the ecosystem needs to be at the table, and making sure that they are ready to commit and support this problem solving effort through sector mobilization. It is a little bit of a like mindset shift around sales and traditional kind of sales. But again, we really think that this is the way that we are getting kind of the people at the table, and that like a no is not really a no. When we've done traditional sales in the past, a no is like, no, we don't want to do your program. So then, okay, then what? What's really cool about this is that we've had a lot of employers come to us and say, no, we don't want to do this, and we think that what you have set up here is great, but we're not ready for it. Okay, great. What are other ways you can still be at the table? And we've had them inform our connection to our New York City public school system. We've had people engage not in our program, but have been able to engage with internship programs instead, which are already at the ecosystem. So one of the cool things that happened this time is We had one of our hospitals come and say, we really want to engage in radiology. And we said, okay, great. Here's what our ecosystem has solved for the radiology program right now. And they said, oh, like we can't do that. We can only do like 6 hours for 3 weeks, and it's kind of more experiential. We don't really have money to pay. And we said, oh, that's great. Look across the table. New York City Public Schools is already running that kind of program. You guys go across the table and talk to them about this. And now they're engaging with that. They're still part of our wheel. And so they might not be ready for this full turn of the wheel, but we think that because they're starting this program as an internship, within the next turn of the wheel, they'll be able to evolve into the program that we're running in radiology, which is really cool. So that's kind of another outcome here, is that it's not a you didn't lose we didn't lose the company. They're just engaging in a different way as they step towards something that, that might look more like what we're doing. Okay. And then the real like meat and potatoes, and again, I would love to like change the size of all of these, but this is the real bulk of the problem solving in the work, right? So when we go back to like kind of like the scientific method piece, like this is when we really do all of the design. This is when we're pulling up our sleeves. For us in healthcare, this has been like a 6 month effort, and it will probably end up, when all is said and done, being more towards like 10 months of this part of the wheel. This is when all of the work happens. And so here is when we're doing things like mapping out the student and employer progression, right? We're defining the program competencies, what credits look like, what are wraparound supports, how are we actually going to make this work? All of this is going to be co-created and detailed program design. We both need training partners and employers. I'm saying employers and training partners, but again, the ecosystem is much bigger than that. We cannot just do it with training employers and training partners. We really need a lot more inputs. So again, that's kind of like a high level view. And then this is also where we launch the pathway, right? So this is where we're testing, right? This is when we get into that testing phase, so that we can really start to see what's working and what's not. Where are we kind of need to refine, or what's working really well that we can grow within this section. This is when we really want to make sure that we have that program design finalized. And again, this is where customization can happen, right? So again, like we had a hospital, like we say that the hours have to be about 16 to 20 hours a week. One of our hospitals, they have to cap at 17 and a half so that they can be eligible for higher ed benefits without going over and getting full-time benefits, which would be too much um, for the cost, right? So like there's a little bit of customization happening there, and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the actual specific employers. This is where we also kind of understand what capacity employers can take on. How many actual students in this opportunity can you take at this point? And then, as I said, this is when we're launching and connecting to our recruitment. So our funnel of young people is coming through, and making sure we have those wraparound supports. So our outcome here is really making sure we are operationalizing the pathways and programs, that we have committed participants, everything is aligned to the sector, and that we're ready to really deliver the skill development, the employment opportunities, and we have measurable outcomes. Great question, Jill, again. Right, so the question is here, how are we capturing the pathway and program design? It's a good question. I think a lot of what we have been doing is uh, experimental so far. And so the way that we're capturing kind of and codifying what that looks like has been on the fly. I don't know that we necessarily have a system, like a durable system to be able to do that, but it is something we are thinking about, and how we can use what we're doing as like a replicable framework. Like specifically in healthcare, I mean, like, a replicable pathway and program design. And then I think folks who engage in this work on like our consulting team, maybe Jill, you would know. But there was some like efforts being made when we had a pathways program about what that could look like. And I think this is something that we're going to pick up in the next phase of our work planning and like change management efforts. But that's a really good call out. Thank you so much, Jill, because it's really important as we try to kind of share resources across the country. Okay. So really, these are the core elements. We have about 6 minutes left. Before I kind of go into like next steps and what's going to happen between now and the retreat, are there any questions about kind of this high level view of the framework, of the blueprint? Um, are there any places in any of these buckets that you want a deeper dive on? Are there particular pain points you're seeing in any of these, sections that you were like, I'd really love to get more information on this one particular piece, or I really need more information about this entire piece of the wheel? Um, I'd love to hear that. And then we can kind of figure out how we can incorporate that when we're together in person. And we'll share this presentation too, so you guys can kind of like sit with this and think about some questions that you might have that you might want to surface when we're together. We will be sending you a guided homework sheet, and really it's trying to tease out um, or elicit from all of you kind of what work is in flight that looks and is very similar to this sector mobilization. We know there's really, really great things happening across the country. And our idea for our time together is really to kind of use that as a working session. So within the homework, you're going to be really reflecting on current efforts either in healthcare, construction, or teaching. Those are like the three big buckets that we'll be working on in to get when we're together in DC. But if there's other sectors that are really high priority for you all, please bring those too. It doesn't just have to be within these three sectors, but we'll be highlighting these three sectors in particular because they are pretty. Oh yes, and advanced manufacturing. Sorry. Healthcare, construction, teaching, advanced manufacturing, and then other. Like, please bring any other sector as well. Um, we're again, the guided exercise is really meant to kind of identify challenges or sticking points, right? We want to see kind of where you see opportunities, where you see some gaps, where you're stuck, where there's overlap or potential connections with other people that will be in the room. And I don't know if there's a way that we can share out kind of like what other folks are going to be bringing, what other sectors folks are going to be bringing forward, or like who's coming to what. But I think you'll be able to see at least those breakout rooms. I think you guys got the invite to kind of select which breakout room you want to go to. So you'll kind of be able to see kind of those four breakout rooms. And again, bringing questions or materials showing your approach. How is your approach similar or different to what we just presented? Because there's a lot of ways that you can kind of look at sector mobilization, obviously TPM, but there's a lot of ways that people are doing this really, really well. And so we want it to be like kind of a mutual learning and understanding session. And then, as I said, we're going to be doing these sector spotlights. We have really wonderful people that are preparing to show, kind of highlight their sectors, um, talk about the lessons learned, key progress, challenges, opportunities that they still have in front of them. And then we're going to do this consultancy. And through this consultancy, we're going to be talking about what those shared initiatives are. So, really, again, sitting at a table next to someone that might have a similar initiative. And figure out how you can actually align. So when Jill is talking about like how are we codifying and capturing those pathways. If someone's working in healthcare, you have an opportunity to sit with a bunch of folks that are doing this and compare notes and ask questions and think about kind of where that might happen. So that's a really great opportunity there. Again, these stuck points and getting feedback from each other. And then making sure that there's really great connection and opportunities for continuous learning and connection points for when we're away from each other after December, and then kind of figure out what those gaps are in the system, and then how we can come together and come up with you all can come up with actionable next steps. So again, really making sure we're using the most of our time together to be collaborative and doing as much less talking than I did today. So with that, there's 2 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions, comments? I will put my email address in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to me. As many of you already know, I love talking about this stuff, so I'm happy to talk all day long. And would love feedback, would love input, because this, as we said, is a growing and living document that we want folks to really feel, encouraged to provide that feedback on. Okay. We will capture the chat, and we will send out this presentation. We will have the recording, and we will send you the homework and some next steps and kind of food for thought between now and the retreat. So please, again, do not hesitate to reach out if you have questions. We're really excited to see everyone in December. The team that's putting together the retreat is doing a phenomenal job. Huge shout out to Jocelyn and Shauna for all the work you're doing and all the other folks that are going to be leading these sessions when we're together. Thank you for all your hard work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everyone.